The 8th episode of Season 9 is finally here. After a week of waiting, we open with Rick in complete stillness, sleeping. But in the middle of the night, something catches his attention. As always, Rick's peace lasts barely any time at all. It's 5:45 a.m., so Rick puts on his robe and heads out through the garage to enjoy a few moments of peace. After watching the sunrise, he heads down to his lab. He puts up the Do Not Disturb sign and enjoys a delicious cup of coffee, while he goes through his daily routine, eating some synthetic food, putting a pair of goblins in his ears, which produce relaxing music with their gases, and reading the digital newspaper. But what really gives him pleasure is grinding an authentic Grimaldian potato and taking that mash to his perfect machine to distill the best alcohol that could be produced in the whole galaxy. Morty shows up a few seconds later and starts yelling at him, but because of the goblins in his ears, Rick can't hear him, so he tries to get his attention another way, but ends up causing a horrible accident and destroying every single one of Rick's creations, turning the whole lab into a scene of chaos. After completely destroying his distillery and the project his grandfather had been working on, Morty is about to get strangled, and he'd better have a really good reason for having ignored the Do Not Disturb sign, which Rick put specifically on the door, right at eye level, so he couldn't ignore it. At that moment, Morty reveals that what he wanted was some Pokemon cards, and Rick loses his patience and tells him that in all the time he's been around, he's never once had a moment of peace and happiness. So that's it. This is over. Rick says some pretty hurtful words to his grandson, and Morty leaves the lab in tears after having destroyed the work Rick was doing, creating the perfect moment to have a drink. Too bad the whole distillery went to hell. After this, Rick decides to go upstairs to ask his granddaughter to buy everything he needs to rebuild what Morty wrecked. He hands her his credit card and accepts the risk that she'll buy a bunch of useless stuff with his money, but that's the price of getting his distillery back. However, there's one very important item his granddaughter won't find in any store: the Grimaldian potato, and the last one left is at the edge of the galaxy. So Rick has a trip to make, but before leaving, he goes into his grandson's room, distracts him for a few seconds, and then injects a strange parasite into his brain called a sympatid, which will raise his empathy levels to the max, so he won't be the ungrateful, destructive grandson he's always been. On top of that, it has a second function. Every time Rick yells at him, hits him, or insults him, the sympatid will change the words entering his ears and turn them into compliments, so they'll never have to fight again. As long as the parasite is in his brain, Rick will be the best grandpa in the world. It sounds like a terrible solution, but for Rick, it makes perfect sense. This is where Rick reveals that the Grimaldian potato he ruined is the prize for a dance competition, so now the two of them are a couple and need to start practicing right away, since after everything he's had to go through, he deserves his drink. During the first round of dancing, the kids do pretty well. The fact that the parasite is doing its job and they're unable to fight with each other gives them the secret to winning over the crowd. By the end of the day, both of them come home with the Grimaldian potato and a much stronger relationship than before, built on all the fake compliments Morty has gotten from his grandfather. Once they get home, Rick pulls the parasite out of his brain and tells him thanks for not being a complete waste of space, showing him he's still upset about what he did. So he just grabs the potato and leaves him feeling awful. That's his punishment for being so reckless. At the same time, his granddaughter is finishing up the shopping, but they're missing the 230-liter drums, and it turns out some idiot bought them all. But they've followed him to the parking lot, where they've realized he's some kind of criminal, since he just subdued a woman and hid her in his truck so no one would see what he'd do with the drums. As usual, a simple errand ends up getting a lot more complicated than it needed to be. To find out, Summer tells her dad he has to act like a serial killer and pretend he just killed her and is trying to hide her in the trunk. Surprisingly, that ends up working, and Jerry strikes up a conversation with the killer, who tells him a rug won't cut it. He needs one of his drums, and he's willing to sell him one for $75. But he needs to follow him home so they can make a much more private exchange, and he can show him the procedure for getting rid of a body. The next day, Morty realizes his life was a lot better with the parasite in his brain. So before heading to school, he injects it into himself again, and that day, he becomes the therapist for all his teachers who have miserable lives and need an ear and a shoulder to cry on. In a single day, Morty puts an end to bullying, his mother's alcoholism, and his teacher's sadness. But meanwhile, his father is having a cup of tea with a serial killer who has boarded up the door so no one can get in or out. At the same time, Summer goes down to the basement and tries to steal the drums, but since they're too heavy, she makes a deal with the kidnapped woman. The only way she'll let her go is if she helps carry the drums. It's that or deal with the serial killer, her call. However, her father isn't doing a great job of acting like a serial killer, and the guy starts to get suspicious of him. Meanwhile, we go back to Morty, who's in a wonderland, since the parasite is doing a great job, but this is where things take a turn. Rick walks up to him, thanks him for being so nice and sweet, and then subdues him in order to use the gun and extract the parasite, which has turned into a massive beast. As the parasite comes out of his brain, the perfect world around him crumbles into ruin and destruction, completely shattering the illusion Morty had been living in, since in reality, he hadn't improved anyone's life. He'd only made it much worse. The huge parasite finally comes out of his ear and then settles down in front of them, enormous in size with jaws full of teeth, eager to devour them. And that's not even the worst part. The illusion was so real that Morty hadn't noticed his arm had been sliced off. And this is the moment Rick takes advantage of to insult him as much as he can, and to point out just how stupid he was for abusing the use of the sympatid. A pretty rough scene for what had seemed like a peaceful dance afternoon. Before the two of them can be destroyed by the parasite, Rick grabs his grandson with his mechanical arm and flees the place, but doesn't waste a single second before continuing to insult him, calling him one of the most unbearable and annoying people he's ever known, and blaming him for ruining every single one of his days. Once he manages to gain a couple seconds lead, Rick reattaches his arm and scans his brain, only to realize his empathy centers have been completely digested, and now Morty is just as stupid and wicked as Rick himself, incapable of producing any sense of empathy. And now he spews insults every time he opens his mouth. Basically, Morty is now just as inconsiderate as his grandfather, or maybe worse. And Rick will have to deal with him like that from now on, or at least until they manage to escape this place, where a bunch of different monsters are trying to destroy them. Before things spiral out of control, Rick admits that maybe using an alien parasite to fix his problem wasn't the right call, and that apologizing to him and having him apologize too for wrecking the lab would have been better. But since things are the way they are, the first priority is getting out of there alive, and they can talk about their issues later. But before they can do that, they need to deal with the huge parasite chasing them all over the place, since it has no plans to give up, having developed a real taste for Morty's brain. When his grandson is in serious danger, Rick springs into action. He uses his strength to throw the parasite aside, then puts himself between it and Morty to protect him. But that doesn't go very well, since the parasite ends up overpowering him. It grabs him by the arms and works its way through his ear until it finally gets into his brain, causing him to collapse instantly and leaving what's about to happen a complete mystery, since they have no idea what a mature parasite will do to the brain of someone like him. Meanwhile, Summer and the kidnapped woman are pushing the drums toward the truck, while Jerry is inside the cabin, trying to distract the killer long enough, but that lie won't hold. The woman wants to run, but Summer tells her that if she dares to try it, she'll start screaming, and they'll both end up dead. But her grandfather can bring her back to life, and not the woman, so she'd better keep quiet. And next time she wants to ask a strange guy in a parking lot for directions, she'll think twice. The best thing she can do now is be grateful Summer wanted those drums, since otherwise she'd still be at the bottom of a well in a killer's basement. Once the woman quiets down and decides to help her, they start loading the drums onto the truck, but they take too long with just one. And that's not all. They end up making so much noise that the killer notices, and when he looks out the window, he can see Summer alive, and Jerry has to admit that she's his daughter. At that moment, the killer believes Jerry actually tried to kill his daughter, and confesses that he called the police, since he'd never been in the presence of such a cruel and demonic killer. Before everyone can escape, several patrol cars show up and surround the cabin. At that moment, the killer starts begging the officers for help, telling them he was kidnapped by a serial killer, and the officers point their guns at Jerry, while the real criminal plays the victim. But once they realize Jerry actually lied through his whole story and is really just an ordinary father, he flies into a rage and tries to kill him for having forced him to call the police, since the shack is full of evidence and he'll never see daylight again. Outside, the officers have no idea who to arrest. The captain is so angry, he fires his gun into his own patrol car and orders them to bring in the battering ram and the special team. No one is leaving that cabin unless they're in cuffs or dead. At that exact moment, we cut back to Rick, who has just woken up after the parasite made its way into his brain. The parasite has completely changed Rick's behavior, and now he's acting extremely sweet, wanting to kiss and hug his grandson constantly. But that's not the most urgent problem. They're still surrounded by monsters, and without Rick, it's nearly impossible for them to escape. The only thing Morty can do is grab the gun in Rick's pocket and take advantage of having zero empathy to kill everything in front of them. But Rick is still a problem, since he starts calling the wives of the monsters he's killing to apologize to them and offer his support during this time of grief. This makes Morty realize just how annoying Rick is with his feelings all the time, especially in dangerous situations, since he always ends up overreacting to everything and getting swept up in the chaos in his own head, turning into a complete liability when what Rick actually needs right now is a real partner. Making the most of his luck, Morty manages to get his grandfather to the ship and sets a course for Earth, but 100 enemy ships are surrounding them, about to take off. With very few seconds to spare, the kids have to escape right away, but at that moment, Morty gets a call from Summer, who tells him their dad is about to be killed by the police. So Morty has no choice but to change the ship's course and activate the hyperjump, leaving behind a vacuum grenade, which creates a black hole that starts sucking in all the enemy ships until it finally collapses in on itself. Once the portal closes, the kids appear in the middle of the woods, ready to help their dad with his problem. But Rick is still a total sweetheart of kindness, and all he can do now is hug his granddaughter and tell her he's really sorry for how he's treated her. The bad news is that the battering ram has just arrived, an enormous tank made of solid steel that promises to smash the shack to pieces. The captain gives the order that whoever comes out first gets shot the most. And whoever comes out second, they can kill however they please. The tension really ramps up at this point in the episode. Before everything goes completely to hell, Morty grabs the loudspeaker from the police captain, and now that he has zero empathy, his words go straight to the killer's heart and convince him to come out, to surrender, and get a sincere hug from someone who knows exactly how he feels. But when the guy steps out, the captain's order is carried out, and a dozen officers riddle him with bullets. The killer takes so many hits that his body slowly starts coming apart, while the officers have plenty of time to reload and keep firing. In the end, all that's left is a huge pile of ground meat and a bloodstain so big it paints the walls. When Jerry tries to walk out, all he can hear are guns clicking on empty, so he survives by pure luck, and the group heads back to the garage, where Rick is thrilled that Summer got everything he asked for, especially the drums, and hopes none of them have a body inside. There, Morty asks how they're going to fix this, since even though he now understands how Rick feels all the time, he doesn't want to feel that way, because it makes him feel isolated. But Rick doesn't want to feel the way he feels either, always too empathetic and sentimental, right on the edge of a breakdown that could get them killed if neither of them keeps their focus. In the end, they balance each other out, and that's why they make such a good team. But now, there's something far more important. The distillery is finally finished, and it's time for Rick to enjoy his drink, made with the galaxy's last Grimaldian potato, which should taste like a drink fit for the gods. So he needs Morty to step out, so he can enjoy this moment in peace. Morty retreats to his room feeling absolutely nothing, since the empathetic part of his brain is still wrecked, and it'll take some time to repair itself. But when he sits down on his bed, a portal opens in the ceiling, and an envelope of Pokemon cards falls into his hand. A kind of apology from his grandfather, who's about to go back to his normal self because, once the liquid hits his system, the delicious taste is so good, Rick can't stop until the huge glass ends up empty and the parasite in his brain can't take it anymore, and it escapes, all on its own, without Rick having to do a thing. All that's left on the floor of his lab is the giant parasite, completely dead, while Rick says goodbye to empathy, maybe the most useless feeling a person can have. Closing out this week's episode with a valuable lesson, which I hope you understood, and if not, go watch the video again, and see you next week with the next one. Another episode that mixes dark humor with a bit of heart, as usual for this show.